In 1628, a 9-year-old boy was brought into a courtroom in Würzburg, Germany. He wasn't there to testify. He was there to confess. Within 3 days, he had named 14 adults. Within a week, he was dead. His execution was recorded in official documents. His name was added to lists stretching across pages. And then the process continued. What happened in Europe between 1560 and 1660 killed tens of thousands of people. But the killing was never the point. Something else was being built. Step by step, case by case, body by body. A machine that didn't need fuel, didn't need belief, only repetition. By the time it stopped, entire towns had been emptied, families erased, and everyone left standing had learned the same lesson. Stay quiet, stay invisible, never stand out. This is the story of what that machine actually did. Not the folklore version, not the simplified story you learned in school, but the documented version. Every subscription helps recover one more erased voice, one more name, date, and procedure recorded in court archives that still exist today, and why it worked so well that parts of it are still running centuries later. The witch hunts are often placed in the medieval period, in the so-called Dark Ages, a time of ignorance and superstition before the Enlightenment. That's completely wrong. They happened later, roughly between 1560 and 1660, during what Europe called the Renaissance and the Reformation, a time of printing presses, universities, international trade, and rising literacy. Martin Luther posted his theses in 1517. The Malleus Maleficarum was printed in 1486. The most intense witch hunts occurred in the 1600s. This is crucial. The same society that produced Galileo, Shakespeare, and the scientific method was also burning people alive in town squares. It wasn't a contradiction, it was a feature. Beneath cultural progress, Europe was coming apart. The Protestant Reformation had split Christianity into competing factions. Catholic and Protestant territories now fought for survival, legitimacy, and control. The 30 Years' War, from 1618 to 1648, would eventually kill roughly 8 million people, about 20% of the population in affected regions. Plagues returned in waves. The Black Death never truly disappeared. Smaller epidemics struck towns every few years. Harvests failed repeatedly. The period from 1560 to 1660 coincided with the Little Ice Age, decades of colder temperatures that shortened growing seasons and devastated crops. Governments were fragile. Borders shifted constantly. Local authorities competed with regional powers. Kings fought with nobles. Everyone fought everyone else. And in the middle of all this chaos, ordinary people struggled to survive. When things went wrong, and things went wrong constantly, people demanded answers. Why did the crops fail? Why did children die? Why did neighbors turn violent? Why did everything feel like it was collapsing? Random chance was not an acceptable explanation. Bad weather, disease, political instability, too impersonal, too uncontrollable, too overwhelming. People needed a cause. They needed someone to blame. The devil became that cause. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, not as some distant theological concept. Satan was understood as a real, present force working through human agents to destroy Christian society from within. And this belief was nearly universal. Protestants and Catholics disagreed on almost everything: worship, church authority, salvation, the nature of faith itself. But they agreed on this. Satan was real, his servants lived among ordinary people, and they were actively trying to bring about the end of the world. When crops failed, it wasn't the weather. When children died, it wasn't disease. When communities fractured, it wasn't politics. Someone had made it happen, and that someone lived nearby. Certain people attracted suspicion more than others. The pattern was remarkably consistent. Widows without family support, women living alone after their husbands died, were vulnerable and visible. Healers who used herbs and charms were suddenly seen as dangerous. Folk medicine, practiced for centuries, was now interpreted as demonic. Midwives present during difficult births became suspects when babies or mothers died. Infant and maternal mortality rates were extremely high, and tragedy had someone to blame. Even minor disputes could linger for years. Arguments over property, livestock, or debts were remembered and woven into narratives of malice. People who didn't attend church regularly were suspect. Those who were disliked, simply for personality or circumstance, could be accused. Sometimes there was no clear reason, just accumulated resentment or envy. Once someone was named, they became the explanation for every misfortune. The failed harvest 3 years ago? She must have cursed the fields. The livestock that died last winter? He made a pact. The stillborn child? A demon's work. The machine had been designed carefully. It did not require mass belief in every individual. It did not rely on ideology alone. It relied on repetition, on process, on fear. Accusations, confessions, trials, executions, they reinforced each other. Each act taught the living to obey, to stay invisible, to conform. One person accused, another confesses, a third dies. And the machine keeps running. By the time it reached its peak, communities had internalized it. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Families were torn apart. Everyone learned the same lesson. Survive by blending in, by never attracting attention, by never standing out. And in Würzburg, in 1628, a 9-year-old boy became one of the many cogs. He named 14 adults, died quietly, and the system moved on, hungry for the next confession. Across Europe, tens of thousands followed the same pattern. Lives ended, families destroyed, entire towns emptied. Not to punish evil, but to enforce compliance, to create obedience, to teach the living to fear, obey, and conform. This was the machine of the European which hunts, systematic, relentless, and terrifyingly efficient. It did not need mass belief, ideology, or extraordinary effort. It only needed repetition, bureaucracy, and fear. Step by step, case by case, body by body, it produced generations trained to survive through silence, invisibility, and submission. She was there when it happened. Fear didn't require evidence, it required a name. In that year, 2 German inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, published a book, Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches. Books about magic, demons, and evil had existed for centuries, but this one was different. It was systematic, organized, procedural. It explained how witchcraft worked, how witches were recruited by the devil, how to identify them, how to question them, and most importantly, how to justify what came next. The book was printed across Europe, translated into multiple languages, distributed to courts, churches, and legal authorities. Between 1486 and 1600, it went through 28 editions. It became a reference manual and normalized a process. The Malleus made several key arguments. First, witchcraft was real, organized, and widespread. This wasn't folklore, it was a conspiracy. Second, witches operated in secret. They hid among ordinary people. Anyone could be a witch. Third, witches would always deny their activities. Denial was not proof of innocence, it was proof of deception. Fourth, physical evidence could be found on the body. Marks, scars, or areas insensitive to pain indicated a pact with the devil. Fifth, confession was the goal. Everything in the process was designed to produce confession. This created a closed system. Accusation triggered investigation. Investigation always found something. The accused always denied it. Denial proved guilt. Interrogation produced confession. There was no escape. Once the Malleus established the framework, courts across Europe began following similar procedures. The process had distinct steps. Step 1, accusation. Someone made a claim. A neighbor reported strange behavior. A relative mentioned suspicion. Sometimes a child repeated what they had heard. Proof wasn't required. Suspicion was enough. Step 2, arrest. The accused was removed from their home, often at night, without warning. They were separated from family and community. This isolation served multiple purposes. It prevented escape, prevented others from helping, and began breaking down the accused's sense of reality. Step 3, examination. The body was searched for marks, moles, scars, or birthmarks, anything that could indicate a devil's mark or a pact. Sometimes areas were pricked with needles. If the accused didn't react, it was recorded as proof. Humiliation was intentional. Examinations were often public or semi-public, reinforcing fear. Step 4, interrogation. The accused were questioned. Sometimes physical pain was applied, thumbscrews, strappado, leg vices, racks. But pain wasn't always necessary. Exhaustion often worked better. Sleep deprivation, days without rest, constant questioning, disorientation, loss of time, hallucinations. These broke the mind. Interrogators didn't wait for confessions, they supplied stories. You flew through the air at night. You attended a forest gathering. You met the devil as a man dressed in black. You signed a pact. You renounced God. Exhausted and terrified, the accused eventually repeated the story. Confession didn't end the case, it expanded it. Interrogators always asked, Who else was there? Who else made a pact? Every name led to another arrest, another interrogation, more confessions. The system fed itself. The process worked because it was consistent. The same steps were followed in village courts and city tribunals, in Catholic and Protestant regions, in wealthy and poor areas. Everyone knew what would happen once someone was accused. Knowledge changed behavior. People stopped defending neighbors because defending the accused made them suspect. They stopped questioning authorities because that too made them suspect. People learned to stay quiet. Silence became the only safe position. The Prince Bishop of Würzburg, Philipp Adolf von Ehrenberg, oversaw one of the most intense witch hunts in European history. In just 5 years, at least 900 people were executed in his territory. The accused came from every level of society. Children as young as 7, university students, priests, city councilors, the vice-chancellor of the university, even relatives of judges overseeing the trials. One 1629 document lists 29 executions in a single batch. This wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was a machine. Step by step, confession by confession, body by body, towns were emptied, families erased, communities terrified into obedience. The system didn't require faith or ideology. It ran on repetition, fear, and procedure. Accusation, isolation, examination, interrogation, confession, and exposure. Every step reinforced the next. The living learned the same lesson. Blend in, stay invisible, never attract attention, obey without question. And yet, it happened during Europe's Renaissance, the same society that produced Shakespeare, Galileo, and the scientific method. Innovation, literacy, and trade expanded even as towns burned and children were executed. Progress and horror existed side by side. It wasn't a contradiction. It was a feature of a society under extreme stress, facing war, famine, disease, and religious conflict. Fear didn't need proof. It only needed a name. And once a name was spoken, the machine moved. Step by step, confession by confession, execution by execution, it consumed lives and communities, teaching a single lesson. Survival required silence, invisibility, and obedience. Among the names were children, a girl of 9 or 10, a boy of 12, the prettiest girl in Würzburg, a student who spoke multiple languages, a wandering boy of 12. Another list included Goebbels' child, a boy of 10 who went to school, 2 strange boys. Age offered no protection. Education offered no protection. Social status offered no protection. Once named, the machine consumed whoever was accused. There was another dimension. When someone was convicted, their property was seized. The costs of trial, imprisonment, interrogation, and execution were charged to the accused estate. Land was taken, savings confiscated, possessions sold. In some cases, families were left destitute. In others, family members themselves became the next accused. This created an economic incentive. Trials generated revenue, confessions produced more trials, and more trials produced more revenue. The machine became self-sustaining. 60 miles away, Prince Bishop Johann Georg Fuchs von Dornheim pursued his campaign in Bamberg. He built a specialized facility, the Drudenhaus, the Witch House, designed to process witch trials. Interrogation chambers, holding cells, administrative rooms to record confessions and property transfers. Everything was organized for maximum efficiency. Approximately 600 people were executed in Bamberg during this period. Among them was Johannes Junius, the mayor, a respected and educated man. In 1628, Junius was accused. During imprisonment, he smuggled a letter to his daughter, Veronica, which survives today. He described the interrogations, shown instruments, warned of what would happen if he didn't confess. Thumbscrews, leg vices, strappado, he endured them all, insisting he was innocent. They continued questioning. Where did you meet the devil? What did he look like? Who else was there? Under extreme duress, he gave them the answers they wanted. He described forest meetings, the devil in dark clothing, named others, all inventions. He ended the letter. They say I have confessed. That is true. But how I came to confess, good God in heaven knows. They have taken me through so much that I know not whether I am alive or dead. Now, dear child, you have here all my acts and confession for which I must die. It is all falsehood and invention. So help me God. 3 days later, he was burned alive. What happened in Würzburg and Bamberg happened elsewhere. Trier, 368 executions between 1581 and 1593. Ellwangen, for 30 executions between 1611 and 1618. The Basque region, 7,000 investigated, most not executed due to skeptical inquisitors. Scotland, 4,000 executions between 1560 and 1707. Numbers varied, legal procedures varied, intensity varied, but the core process remained the same: accusation, isolation, interrogation, confession, execution, new accusations. Executions were public. Town squares, designated grounds, crowds of hundreds. Condemned were transported through streets in carts before execution. Methods varied by region: burning at the stake in German territories, hanging in England and Scotland, sometimes hanging first, then burning. Executions could last hours. The audience wasn't there to mourn, they were there to watch and learn. Accusation was more dangerous than guilt. Defending someone made you suspect. The process was more powerful than innocence. Asking questions was risky. Survival required silence. Each execution taught the population how to behave. Every repetition reinforced the lesson. The hunts didn't persist because everyone believed in witchcraft. They persisted because the system became self-justifying. Each execution proved witches existed. Each confession proved interrogation methods worked. Each new accusation justified the next. The machine produced its own evidence. Courts cited confessions as proof. Officials cited executions as results. Communities cited the next accusation as justification. Questioning the system meant admitting previous executions might have been wrong, and that admission never came. Confession was the centerpiece. Without it, the system could falter. With it, everything was justified. The accused had admitted guilt in their own words, often in front of witnesses. The confession created a circular logic. Suspicion led to accusation, accusation to interrogation, interrogation to confession, confession to execution, execution to more accusations. The process became a machine that consumed lives, property, and social bonds. Children, adults, the learned, the respected, the poor, and the wealthy. No one was safe once named. Economic incentives reinforced the system. Confiscated property funded the trials, which produced more accusations, which produced more executions. The machine was self-perpetuating, independent of belief, sustained by fear, greed, and procedural rigor. Families learned quickly. Silence and invisibility were the only guarantees of survival. By the early 17th century, the witch hunt machinery had reached terrifying efficiency. It moved methodically, with bureaucratic precision, using accusation, interrogation, confession, and execution as levers of control. Communities became instruments of their own oppression, neighbors reporting neighbors, children betraying parents, towns turning against themselves. Authority, procedure, and fear created a feedback loop no one could escape. In Würzburg, Bamberg, Trier, Ellwangen, Scotland, and the Basque region, the same process unfolded repeatedly. Public executions taught conformity. Accusations created panic. Confessions created justification. Each step reinforced the next, until the entire community had internalized the rules. Survive by staying silent, obey, and never stand out. The witch hunts were not random. They were a machine, consuming thousands, producing evidence for itself, teaching everyone the same lesson. Accusation is more dangerous than guilt. Silence is safety, and the system is unstoppable. The fact that confessions were produced through torture, exhaustion, and supplied narratives didn't matter in official records. What mattered was that they existed. Court records from one trial were referenced in others. Manuals like the Malleus Maleficarum were copied and distributed. Legal scholars wrote treatises on handling witchcraft cases. Officials who had conducted trials in one region moved to another, bringing their methods with them. The system became standardized not through central planning, but through repetition and imitation. One of the most disturbing developments was the use of child testimony. Children were considered particularly vulnerable to demonic influence, but also less likely to lie initially. In some cases, children's accusations triggered mass trials. In Sweden in 1668, a series of child accusations led to around 300 people being accused in Mora. In Salem, Massachusetts in 1692, around 85 people were executed after accusations by young girls. Children were questioned about what they saw, asked leading questions, praised when they provided the right answers, and eventually repeated the story expected of them. The system began to collapse when it reached too far. Mayors, priests, judges, and nobles appeared on execution lists. If status and education offered no protection, no one was safe. Courts began requiring more evidence. Confessions obtained under torture were quietly discredited. Legal procedures changed. Standards tightened. By 1650, the most intense period of the hunts was over. Change did not come from compassion. It came from self-preservation. Estimates vary, but historians generally agree that between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft in Europe between 1560 and 1660. Some estimates are higher, some lower. Records were inconsistent or lost, but the scale is clear. Tens of thousands dead, 75 to 80% of them women, most over 50, many living alone and economically vulnerable. For every death, thousands more watched. They watched neighbors arrested, trials proceed, executions carried out, and they adjusted their behavior. They learned to avoid conflict, attend church regularly, keep opinions private, and never stand out. The machine killed tens of thousands, but controlled millions. Beyond direct deaths, entire communities were damaged. Trust between neighbors evaporated. Social bonds fractured. Knowledge held by healers and midwives was lost or suppressed. The fear of accusation reshaped behavior and persisted long after the trials ended. Thousands of documents survive today in European archives. Court records, confessions, execution lists, property seizures, administrative correspondence. These documents show the bureaucratic nature of what happened. The process was recorded, the steps documented, outcomes filed. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't mob violence. It was administration. The witch hunts are often described as mass hysteria or collective delusion, but hysteria is chaotic and unpredictable. This system was organized and consistent. The same procedures were followed across regions, legal systems, and religious denominations. The same questions were asked, the same confessions produced, the same outcomes executed. The system didn't hunt witches. It manufactured confessions. It redistributed property. It enforced conformity. It demonstrated power. It trained society to fear accusation more than injustice. The European witch hunts killed tens of thousands over 100 years, but executions were the smallest part of what happened. What the system actually did was create a template for controlling populations through fear of accusation, for extracting confessions that justified predetermined outcomes, for making process more important than truth. That template didn't disappear when the witch hunts ended. The same structures were used later. The same logic applied elsewhere. The same procedures refined and repeated. Different targets, different justifications, different names, but the same machine. The witch hunts ended in Europe by the late 1600s, but the system they built never stopped running. It just changed what it hunted. The histories that disturb us most are those showing what we are still capable of. The machinery of accusation, fear, and bureaucratic control persists, adapted to new contexts. Every subscription, every record preserved, helps uncover the parts that conventional histories leave behind. Every recovered story restores a name, a voice, a life erased by the machinery.